They argued because this would affect the economy, and when you affect the economy, you affect Social Security revenues, that affects Social Security. Of course, that's a classic case of an argument that proves too much. It would mean that nothing could ever be done by majority rule. They are now about, I'm sure, to attack the parliamentarian, who was a very honest and very straightforward guy. And, of course, one of the discouraging things here has been not only that they are wrong, I believe, on the substance, but that's a legitimate debate. But you've seen these thuggish tactics that have been employed with encouragement from some, not all, obviously, Republican leaders. And that's a very disappointing undermining of democracy. I just got to say, Rachel, you know, in Massachusetts, they just passed a very good bill, unanimous, Democrats and Republicans, to try and prevent junior high school kids and high school kids from being bullied, from the name-calling, etc. And that's going on in a lot of places in the country. We had suicides from young people who have been bullied. What do they see, though, if they watch television over the weekend? Adults doing the same kind of bullying and Republican leaders cheering on the bullies.
Congressman Frank, you were the subject, you were the object, I guess, of a little bit of that bullying. Politico reported over the weekend that when you arrived at the House chamber, somebody yelled a homophobic slur at you.
More than one. Yeah, my partner Jim and I were walking from, it was a nice day, we walked from the one House office building to another. There was a great deal of shouting, you know, waving of fists and signs, and people sort of getting very close and yelling, and a number of the comments were homophobic.
Did you feel personally threatened, or what was your reaction to that experience?
Really sadness because, look, you know, as Jim said, we're kind of adults, and, you know, I haven't got a lot of respect for these people, to be honest, so who cares what they say to me. But you do have to think about it. I'm serious about this. This bullying in junior high and high school, it's a big problem. Again, every Democrat and every Republican in the Massachusetts legislature voted for any bullying bill. What occurs to me is there are kids all over the country watching this, not as a game, but as real life, and watching sort of respectable so-called politicians cheering them on. And that was just discouraging that at this point in our history, we couldn't have a rational debate, but these kind of thug tactics were being used.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not in the position of apologizing for anybody else, but to the extent that I can, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right.
And I'll take a set of knives.
Actually, you know, they slice, dice, and julienne.
Yep.
So, thank you, Congressman. Really appreciate it. Democratic Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts is, of course, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. He has been incredibly busy and working incredibly long hours his last few days, as have so many members of the House, which makes us particularly grateful that he joined us tonight. In the end, Congressman Bart Stupak was among the 219 House Democrats who voted for the Senate's version of health reform last night. He did not get included in that legislation, the so-called Stupak Amendment, the big rollback of abortion rights he did manage to slide into the original House bill last year. The bill that passed last night did not include the Stupak Amendment. But it did, of course, include the Senate bill language on abortion, which is a very specifically written ban on federal funding for abortion. That's all Congressman Stupak ever claimed that he wanted. But he's been either not telling the truth about the anti-abortion Senate bill language or actively ignoring that language ever since it came into existence. But just because Mr. Stupak did not win on this issue doesn't mean he walked away empty-handed. He did get something out of this months-long, all-hold health reform hostage anti-abortion stunt. Actually, he got two things out of this. Neither one is what he said he wanted in the first place. First, Bart Stupak got famous, publicly leading the effort to derail the single biggest, most ambitious policy priority of his own party, helped get Congressman Stupak on TV a lot. Woo! And by holding health reform hostage, by threatening to vote against it, along with what turned out to be 7 of his colleagues, not apparently the dozen he once claimed were on a list in his shirt pocket, Congressman Stupak did not just get all the attention he appeared to be so desperately craving. Congressman Stupak also got an anti-abortion consolation prize, maybe?
The President has announced he will be signing an executive order to reinforce that principle, that belief that we all stood on. No public funding for abortion.
Congressman Stupak, in other words, agreed to vote for the Senate's version of health reform, which explicitly bans federal funding of abortion, on the sole condition that the President sign an executive order saying that the Senate bill bans federal funding of abortion. The executive order in question affirms that the health reform bill, quote, maintains current Hyde Amendment restrictions, which ban federal funding of abortion, and extends those restrictions to the newly created health insurance exchanges. Again, the Senate bill was already consistent with the Hyde Amendment. It already banned federal funding for abortions. So in terms of policy, in terms of a practical impact, Bart Stupak's make himself famous abortion stunt accomplished nothing. But the Stupak stunt is not without political consequences. President Obama is, of course, pro-choice. He is on the record opposing the Hyde Amendment. Back in 2007, his campaign told RH Reality Check unequivocally that then-Senator and candidate Obama did not support the Hyde Amendment. He did not support the Hyde Amendment restrictions on federal funding for abortion. Now, as president, Mr. Obama just agreed to sign an executive order ensuring that the Hyde Amendment abortion restrictions are maintained and possibly expanded. So, any pro-choice progressives out there who thought they might have had some help in getting the Hyde Amendment overturned during this presidency should probably consider themselves officially out of luck. Bart Stupak, of course, should consider himself to be someone who still hasn't disclosed who subsidizes his rent for all those years that he lived at the C Street house in Washington. Joining us now is Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Democrat of Illinois. She's a member of the Congressional Pro-Choice Caucus. Congresswoman Schakowsky, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I know it's been a tiring few days for you.
Exhilarating, but tiring. You're right. Thanks, Rachel.
What does this executive order mean in practical terms? Does this further restrict access to abortion in this country?
Not any more than the Hyde Amendment does, or current law does, or that the Senate bill does. It's kind of, not everybody listens to you, Rachel, when you clearly explained that public funding was not in the bill. So this is like taking a highlighter and underscoring the language that was already in the bill. Look, the pro-choice caucus never liked the Hyde Amendment. We still want to address that, and we still certainly want to change the Nelson language, which is the abortion language that's in the Senate bill. But it does not further restrict a woman's access to abortion. There are some mechanical things that still need to be dealt with. The two-check issue, I think there are ways that it can be handled where it's not burdensome. But as far as the actual provisions of restrictions, they're not past current law.
Are you disappointed that this does appear to contradict candidate Obama's statement about how he felt about the Hyde Amendment when he was running for office in 2007? As you say, it doesn't make things practically worse, but it does imply that he's not going to be an ally on withdrawing the Hyde Amendment if that had been the pro-choice caucus's goal.
Well, I think there are a bunch of things that we could do. I have heard that even those who define themselves as pro-life are interested in doing some things like adding a fetal anomaly to one of the reasons why perhaps an abortion might be considered legal. Right now it's rape, incest, and the possible death of a mother. So there are ways that I believe that we can expand the provisions under the Hyde Amendment to give more access. We needed to do this to get the votes, but let me just read to you. It says, the President has said from the start that this health insurance reform should not be the forum to upset long-standing precedent. The health care legislation and this executive order are consistent with this principle. So I think the President actually went out of his way to make sure that he was not codifying Hyde. I know that Bart used that language on the floor. He said that this codifies Hyde. It does not. Codified specifically means put in statutory language, and it doesn't do that. This is still part of the regulations. And there's still absolutely room for the pro-choice caucus to move ahead.
I don't like to get too caught up in the process and in protocol and in manners in Washington. I think we in the press tend to read too much into that. But with that caveat, I do want to ask you if the White House consulted with you and with the pro-choice caucus about what it was doing, or if it just worked this out with Congressman Stupak and the other anti-choice members. The reason I'm asking, of course, is I think the people who are pro-choice in this country are wondering if pro-choice members of Congress are being disrespected by the White House, if they are getting the kind of access that their numbers would indicate that they should.
Well, you're right about the numbers, by the way, that if the Stupak language had been in the bill, we think about 50-plus members would have absolutely said no to health care reform. So they did have to listen to us, and what they did yesterday, seems a million years ago, yesterday morning was to put in our hands, at the very same time that Bart Stupak saw the language, the proposed language that the White House had for the executive order. So we were in one room with a lawyer from the White House. They were in another room with a lawyer from the White House discussing what the language was. So they didn't see it before us. There was no negotiation with the White House before we each saw that language. Diana DeGette, who is the co-chair of the pro-choice caucus, she's an attorney, and so we certainly had the firepower on our side as well. And while we did recommend some slight changes, none of those changes were a deal breaker, and we felt that at the end of the day, getting the votes to pass this incredibly comprehensive and historic bill, you went over all the wonderful things that it does.